My name is Mike Walter. I'm the principal evening news anchor at CGTN. So generally, you'd see me tonight at 7:30 and 9 and 9:30 anchoring our evening newscasts. But today I'm here doing this. So I get an evening off to spend some time with the family. I also host a talk show on the weekends called Full Frame. I started at CGTN a little over 11 years ago, and I love Abby's description of the chamber as a bridge. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to join this news organization and create this bridge between East and West. And I can remember our first week on the air, we had the vice president of China visiting Washington, D.C. Then he went to Iowa and then on to Los Angeles, spending a lot of time with the vice president of the United States. His name, Xi Jinping, the other vice president, Joe Biden. Now they're presidents. And as a bridge builder, I think I've done a pretty fairly terrible job because, you know, at that time, it seemed like relations were okay between the United States and China. And as we've noted, there seems to be maybe some fissures in the bridge as it goes from east to west. Hopefully at some point, though, things will remedy itself and we'll see an improvement. I always say that the pendulum swings this way and then swings back. It just kind of seems to be stuck over here. We need to just kind of shove it in this direction. But I think everybody in this room recognizes the benefit of it moving in that direction. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start. We'll go with you, and we'll have you introduce yourself. And we'll kind of come around, and that way, when they get to me, then I can have some questions, and we can go back and forth.
Thank you, Mac. Hello, everyone. My name is Yu Zhanfu. You can call me Jeff. Yeah, so I'm from the strategy consultancy Roland Berger. Originally, I worked in Beijing for more than 10 years with Roland Berger, and last August, I relocated to our Chicago office. Our firm is a strategy consultancy started from 1967 and 56 years history. And in America, we operate our Boston, Detroit, and Chicago office since 2000. When I was in China, I helped a lot of the Chinese companies to think about their global expansion. So America is actually one important destination. And here, when I physically moved here and at this side, I try to give my effort to help the Chinese companies to give them a pull to better development here. So very great honor to be here and to share more with you. Thank you.
Kurt?
My name is Kurt Foreman, and I'm the president and CEO of a group called the Delaware Prosperity Partnership. So we are a public-private economic development group that promotes the state of Delaware, both for expansion and growth of companies. Our team has had a long-standing relationship with CGCC, even before our current governor, Governor Markell, who's now an ambassador in Europe. So we know the team very well and have had some interesting Chinese investment in our communities in the last few years. But the history of China and Delaware goes back 100 years plus to when DuPont was one of the very first companies from the US to invest in China. So long history, and glad to be with you this afternoon, excuse me.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Benjamin Jervich, and I've worked with BYD for about 10 years now. My current role is a regional business development manager. I'm sure many of you know BYD, but just for the uninitiated, BYD is the largest manufacturer of rechargeable vehicles in the world, passenger electric vehicles, battery electric trucks, school buses, transit buses, and we're the largest manufacturer of iron phosphate chemistry batteries, and really a leader in the clean tech revolution. We've operated in the U.S. since 2003, and looking forward to sharing more of our experiences here today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Lin with Beamvest Consulting. We are a firm that provides site selection, incentive, negotiation, and lending service to inbound Chinese investment projects. I've been doing this for a little while, over 2 decades at different capacity. My first project was Haier, the home appliances maker that came to this country in 1999. And later I worked for South Carolina Department of Commerce for 15 years and 4 years with Georgia Department of Economic Development. So we set up our own team, continue advising inbound Chinese projects coming to this country. I'll give you all a little bit detailed report at a later time. Thank you.
So I think that kind of opens things up. Obviously, we've got a wide variety of interests up here and knowledge on this relationship between China and the United States. It's interesting, this business survey going back a decade, we kind of can track kind of this relationship and kind of the volatility, not just in the relationship, but of course in recent years, the economy as well with the pandemic and so forth. Why don't I start with you? What are some of the trends that you saw in this report that kind of stick out at you? And talk to us a little bit about the volatility and what you're seeing. And I think all of us want to see a silver lining. Do you see one anywhere?
Yes, believe it or not, I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than many of you sitting here. Again, I remember as I was working with Hire in 1999, that's before China. I guess China at that time was on the eve of its big economic development takeoff. Very few, even Western companies went to China to set up its wholly owned operation, not mentioning Chinese company coming to the US claiming that they will invest $30 million and creating 250 jobs. I mean, everybody thought they were nuts. I mean, it couldn't happen. It will not happen. And as we get closer to the announcement, that's when the embassy incident in Yugoslavia happened. That was a very sensational moment. So Hire went to ask many ministries, including the Chinese embassy here, what should we do? I mean, are we going to proceed? And the answer was resoundingly yes. So they obviously proceed with that project. And when you look at what happened in the past 5-6 years, I mean, or longer, a lot of things happened that many of us had never witnessed, you know, no matter it's the pandemic, the logistic challenges, the labor force shortage, the trade war, the presidential election, and many other things, you name it. But as I talk to each of the projects that I landed here in this country, over 2 billion, actually the past 2-3 years has been probably their best years so far. I'm not suggesting that comes with no difficulties and challenges. Actually, the biggest one will be the labor situation here. Otherwise, many of them would have announced other expansion. The other thing that makes me more optimistic is that when you look at the country of China or the overall relationship, I'm in my 50s, so I remember when I was a little boy, you know, how in the 70s, every 2-3 years, something happened, which one thing led to another. So sometimes we'll say in China, 5 years, another generation. So I don't think anybody has, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but again, I like to maintain much more optimistic. That keeps us going. Thank you.
Well, John, I'm a little older than you, and one thing leads to another. I've lived through that too. I just kind of want them to stop. You know, can we just stop at this one for a while and not lead to the next one? But Ben, it's interesting because we had a chance to chat in the hallway before this session, and your history with BYD kind of dovetails with mine. I think you've been with them for about a decade, so you've also witnessed a lot of ups and downs. Can you talk to us about the volatility? Somehow BYD still seems to be going strong despite the relations. And I think some of that may be due to, you know, we think of governments, you know, we think of Xi and Biden, but there's other governments, the subnational and the local governments. And I think one of the things that I've witnessed over the 10 years is those relationships are still so vitally important. No matter how much fire is going up here, stuff can still get done down here. Can you talk to us about what you've seen, and is that kind of your takeaway as well?
Yeah, it's a great point. So BYD's always tried to maintain a long-term view on things. And for that reason, I think we're very optimistic still in the future of our business in the Americas. And to your point, when we expanded the business starting in about 2011 on the West Coast. We relocated our headquarters from Chicago to Los Angeles. And it was at that time we came across a wonderful mayor in the city of Lancaster, California, named Mayor Rex Paris. Lancaster at the time was having 24% unemployment. Just to give you an idea, that's 1% lower than what it was during the Great Depression. And he saw the clean tech wave coming. He saw how California could become really a leader in this space, and obviously pair that up with BYD's corporate capability and desire to want to launch in the US and expand our public transportation business. And so, pleased to report we've had a lot of success working with Mayor Paris and a lot of local governments across the nation. In 2017, we tripled the size of the factory. We purchased a factory in 2013. It was actually a disbanded RV manufacturer that had gone into insolvency during the credit crisis. And we tripled it. We've hired about 550 employees that work out of that. It's a unionized facility. We're very proud of some of the other things that we've done there. We have a battery manufacturing facility. And it's really been a strong local partnership, and those mutually beneficial relationships with the government absolutely exist, and we're confident in that going forward too.
So I grew up in Southern California. I worked in Lancaster many, many, many years ago, and it's just kind of this desert environment, nothing there. And BYD has really kind of rejuvenated that whole region. And I think that's one of the things that fails to be recognized a lot of time in the discourse here in the United States is just how important foreign direct investment can be for a community and keep in terms of vibrancy, tax dollars, employing people. And Kurt, it's great listening to you because I almost feel like you're kind of a resident Chinese, because you started with a story about 100 years ago, which is great because everybody in the United States
I
talks.
wasn't around then.
Neither was I. But here in the United States, it's like 5 weeks. But the Chinese tend to, you mentioned 5 years. When I first started at CGTN, it's like we've got a 5-year plan. Here, it's just like all over the place. Can you talk to us about what you witnessed too? And I think that gets back to what I just mentioned about BYD. If you are able to attract that foreign direct investment, these people are here for the long haul, which is really great for communities.
It is. And it's, if you take a portfolio strategy to your personal finances, you should take a portfolio strategy to your economy as well. And I've actually had experience in multiple parts of the country. So I've been in Delaware almost 6 years, but I've experienced other parts. In fact, my first effort to go after a Chinese company was when Sany decided to come to the United States. And we thought we were going to fish and bring Sany to our community. They ended up in Georgia instead, but it's a fascinating process. I think in a local community, a job and who creates that job may not really matter to the local families or such. And I think you need to have that kind of a philosophy when you're thinking of where to invest in the US, that a great company from China or a great company from Germany, or in the case of a great company from the US going to China, because that's important as well. I think having the insights to say that there can be a lot of combinations that will make sense. I also think that the fact that the combination of the cultures and the different backgrounds of both companies and the people who come to join your community can make a huge difference in the future of your community. I'm sure in the case of Lancaster, well, my family's from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so I don't know if they say it the same way, but I'm sure Lancaster, California has changed by the families that have come over. We've had Chinese workforce coming as engineers and scientists for decades and decades, and it's developed a very strong Chinese and Chinese American community in our area, which gives people an experience base to understand what else could happen. So, a lot of times it's about the local community getting to know the culture in the area. Just like China, I'm sure different parts of different states of China have different flavors, literally food and maybe local culture the same in the US. And I think I would say Chinese companies need to make sure they're learning the local culture and sharing their culture at the same time. I think that kind of people do business with who they know, and being able to know each other makes a lot of the other things subside.
Yeah, relationships mean everything. Jeff, I'm going to get to
Absolutely.
you in just a minute, but I want to ask you a follow-up because you used the word fishing. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's a reluctance to go fishing now in the environment that we're in terms of trying to go and lure and because of, the dynamic that we're watching in terms of the relationship and if that is the case, that there's a reluctance to go fishing, I mean, you've already, I think, hit on what we lose as a result, because when you attract these new people, suddenly we learn, we may see differences initially, but then we see similarities and we create these bonds. And I just think that our country's just so much richer as a melting pot.
And as the two largest economies, I think it only makes sense for us to be thinking about how to invest together and to be doing things together. I don't know if there's a reluctance to fish, but I think putting the welcome mat out and being a place that people should look at. I think we have 50 states plus some territories like Puerto Rico and others that are out in this game. I think having the welcome mat out in a consistent way and being able to answer questions and talk about whether it's labor force or the real estate environment. By the way, Abby, I thought the report was fabulous. On page 20 is a great list of factors of which, quite honestly, if we did a survey of American companies, many of the same factors, workforce and other things, would be top there as well. So, I do think we lose something by not being open and engaging to a variety of potential opportunities in a community. I think we shortchange our families and our communities when we do that.
Well, certainly Lancaster, California has learned the benefit of fishing. I mean, it's really changed the complexion of that city. Jeff, I want to give you a chance to answer the question as well. What have you seen these last 10 years or so? And, as we talk about some of the challenges, there are also still opportunities out there as well.
Yeah. I think looking back for the past decade, definitely there are good times and also challenging times, but there are also several very significant big themes that we can easily detect. The US and China basically number one and number two country in terms of GDP volume, and in terms of population, big market. So for quite many civil business sectors, these two markets is actually probably the most important two on the globe. So if we look back at the past 10 years, I think several trends very clear. First one is more and more Chinese companies is coming to America. In terms of the absolute number, in terms of the industry background, they come here. So that is actually a big trend, regardless of the fluctuation of the bilateral relationship. The second thing we noticed actually for the Chinese companies who come to America, their practice here is becoming more and more deep and also asset heavy. Originally just to set up a representative office and several small people team, but later on they just even set up the factory R&D center and also engage a lot of the local talents. Even for their senior leadership, we saw many cases they actually just engage American people. I think this is also a very good signal that Chinese companies actually very commitment to capture the business opportunity and also benefit their own operation in China. And in the recent years, the situation is kind of challenging, but I personally don't observe any Chinese company just abandon American market, withdraw. No such case, but quite on another direction, they present quite some resilience and also their wisdom to how to cope with the challenging situation and how to survive and eventually waiting for a new round of the survive in the future. Yeah, so that's some of my observation.
So John, let me ask you about best practices. As we look at the geopolitics, we know that they're kind of difficult right now, but what are some of the best practices you're seeing with Chinese companies here in the United States and some of the success stories? I mean, Ben's already kind of talked about BYD and kind of landing in Lancaster and kind of changing the complexity of this, desert city. Talk to me about what we're seeing.
Of course, there are many things I can mention, but one thing I'm mostly impressed is that the persistencies that these Chinese companies, the owners, the management have toward this market. There's a project that I work with. Actually, I had my first meeting in their headquarters in Hangzhou in 2012. The project was announced in late 2013, and they built a greenfield investment project, $200-some million. And then went into production the spring of 2015. This is the only project that actually they make their products, and these products will be shipped back to China. Basically, it's cotton yarn. The reason is that prior to them coming to the US, they also import this or act as a distributor for their counterparts in the US. They were very profitable, even more profitable than they making their own yarn inside China. So that's the logic behind that, to build this factory, 200-some million. Of course, trade war broke out, and China has issued some punitive tariff on import cotton yarn from the US. So that basically cut off their whole market, so to speak, to China. But the Chinese company owner, of course, they have gone through many different challenges, both abroad and at home. And I think they are very adaptable to the new challenges. So they were trying to do different things to, cope with the changes. And they built their market in Central America, in North America, and even so they basically lost money for about 3 years while having 400-some people on their payroll. I feel very bad because this is a project the owner claimed that I'm the one who brought them here, and that's just too much a burden for me. So I said, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I put you in such a difficult position. He said, oh, no, don't feel bad. If we are in a manufacturing business, we don't look at the next 2-3 years. We look at the trend. I still believe that I see the trend that we need to go beyond our comfort zone. We need to come to the US. We need to build our operation here to better support the market. So they turn around in about 2018, 2019, and they have been very profitable ever since. They have really, it's been recognized, they have the best quality. They know about manufacturing. So I think that's one thing that, these operations, taught me, which is, these are very hardworking people. They are so committed to this market. They'll go through some up and downs. They take the long-term view, and that happens to many of my projects.
Yeah, it's amazing, that long-term view. You don't see that here in the US very much. It's kind of
Well,
whipsaw.
If I may add, even during the so-called best time of overall relationship between the two countries, or the more challenging time now, all of my projects are by the private-owned Chinese companies. Again, it's not by design or choice. I think we all know, if we see what's happening with the export out of China, they are mostly being handled by the private-owned Chinese companies, as well as the so-called multinationals. Few state-owned, really feel they need to get their hands dirty to compete against everyone under the sun in the US market. So again, it's not by design or preference. It's just, mostly based on at the end of the day, you need to make the math work by knowing you can come here to be profitable.
Yeah, Ben, let me ask you the same question. Just from looking at it, BYD also has this long-term vision, don't they? And can you talk about best practices? One of the things that I think also gets lost is, you know, corporate citizenship. A lot of these companies come into these communities and they really have a stake in the community. I mean, it's not just, I'm thinking a lot now about the pandemic. So many Chinese companies that have really stepped up and tried to provide aid and help and that sort of thing. But corporate citizenship is a big part of it too, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as we were expanding our factory in Lancaster, California, we were the first in the industries that we participate in to sign a landmark community benefits agreement, which basically said, we're going to try and have the majority of our workforce be minority and women-based, workforce. Pleased to report we have over an 85% diversity in our workforce composition today in Lancaster. And on top of that, part of that agreement also said that we would have a percentage target of trying to, hire citizens returning from incarceration and giving people a second chance. And we have a ton of stories of that. People, that want to work, they're hardworking people, and they're willing to receive quality training from BYD and move on. And we've elevated a lot of those people within our organization. In turn from that, those people then go back into, society and really become contributing members to society in the areas that we work. But BYD, especially in Southern California, but it's pretty much nationwide at this point, we're really seen as a local US manufacturing business to the extent that we can. We're involved in every business chamber in Southern California. We're actively participating in those. We work with charities. During the pandemic, we donated millions of dollars of PPE equipment to the people in need on the first line. And so, yeah, we've really tried to do that. Back to the view on long-term, something that I have a lot of conversations with our team on engineering, for example, is it's not only thinking long-term when things are going bad, but when things are going well too. We know we have a lead in technology in the spaces that we're in electric vehicles, but that certainly is no excuse for complacency. Keep on the cutting edge of research and development and also customer service. And so, with a long-term view, I think you can really be successful. It helps you navigate some of the uncertainty in times and really allows you to go all in. But at the same time, when things are good, it allows you to continue to focus on where you think you're weak and obviously come through the uncertain times stronger.
And, when you look at the economy right now and you look at the geopolitics and the relationships, you kind of look at business as an accordion. When things are going well, you can go like this, but when things are going bad, you go in this direction. But I think it's worth pointing out that you're now not in Southern California, you're in Boston. BYD isn't thinking, let's go this way, let's go broader. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Northeast is an area that we've been looking at for a long time, and we're continuing to try and develop business in. A lot of the large transit agencies like New York MTA, the Port Authority, MBTA in Boston, they all have electrification mandates in the future, and we're a leader in the electric bus space, for example, and we think we have the right technology. So certainly areas that we're looking at for sure.
So Kurt, talk to us about businesses. What should Chinese businesses be looking at in terms of best practices to kind of navigate where, there's a mountain of issues out there, geopolitics, the relations, inflation, we think credit is going to tighten. There's a lot of issues out there to deal with. Any best practices or suggestions for Chinese businesses moving forward?
Well, first I want to give Ben my card because I'm a Northeastern state, so would like to talk to you guys.
Look at that. That's how
There
things
you
are
go.
done here.
Just kidding. No, I think the issues are probably the ones you would think about. Does the part of the country that you're looking at make sense? They started in California. Now they're focusing on another region, perhaps where their market is the communities and the places are interested in what they make. I think, one, you need to be thinking about, does the places you're considering match up with what your goals are and your opportunities are? That would be first. I think thinking about workforce and not just the current workforce, but the future workforce in an area is critical. And that goes for any company. If you're not thinking about that, you probably will make a mistake. I also think, is your supply chain in the area? Do the logistics work? I mean, the things that you should be thinking about, you should have thought about 20 years ago, are by far still super important. you may want to start thinking about what's your engagement strategy. You heard from Ben about their community engagement strategy, whether it's, and while it sounds positive for the community, and it is, it's also positive for the company to think about people coming out of the justice system and being great employees. Companies that do that well have very loyal employees that are likely to make a huge difference. So just thinking about, and not being invisible. Sometimes I find talking to companies, they want to almost be invisible in their community. And that's not a good strategy if you're trying to recruit future workforce. People need to go, oh, I've heard of that company. I've heard good things about that company. I'd like to go work at that company. And they're part of our community or part of our area. So I think companies have to be much more aggressive at thinking about how are they coming across in the places they operate, wherever they choose, right from the beginning. It's not something you go, oh, well, we'll hide behind the bushes or the gates and no one will know we're here. That's not a good strategy.
Jeff, it's interesting. Kurt was talking about, you got to have kind of thinking about these things 10 years out, but, and he also used the word invisible. And it's so interesting. I work in downtown Washington, DC on the 4th floor. There's buildings across from me, and years back, 3-4 years ago, look across, see all these people at desks. And then during the pandemic, I'd look across, the lights were on, but there was nobody at any of the desks. And I don't think any business could have seen that one coming. And still I look across and there's still a lot of empty spaces and stuff. So from a business standpoint, it's some things you can adjust for and say, okay, well, we can do this or that. There are things, curveballs thrown at you, the pandemic being one of them. But in terms of looking forward thinking, what would you recommend for Chinese businesses? And especially during a downturn like this, how do you grow your portfolio now, or how do you position yourself to grow once the economic downturn is ended and it's full steam ahead?
Sure. I think one important thing is actually for the Chinese company, the one reminding to be really open-minded, and don't bundle your original thinking, your experience from China market, your experience from the good timing. So the situation changed a lot, and the American market quite a lot of the difference in many different dimensions across China. So really open-minded for new rules and new approaches to play with the market. That's very important. And I think looking forward, how to really navigate through the current challenge and really to find a new opportunity. I think for the core business, a lot of the Chinese companies are already doing that to really, focusing on the cash cow business and really shrinking or just stop for a while for the business, which is actually just burning cash, but without bringing much of the revenue profit. So 2080 rule is still quite universal for many different business portfolio. So really focusing on the core business to navigate. And meanwhile, as you mentioned, to try to find the new growth curve, the second growth curve. The portfolio expansion is actually a very tricky topic, and it can definitely help you to get some new revenue stream. But meanwhile, it presents quite a lot of challenge for your capability. Whether the new business you choose to go into have a lot of the synergy, whether you have the capability resources, whether you have the talents, and especially in the current challenging time, you probably can't just tolerate the long-term investment without a very quick revenue or profit return. So basically the selection will be very challenging. So how to really have a systematic approach to find different possibilities and really screen from different dimensions, narrow down to a short list and get the necessary resources and talent to work very quick and efficiently. So that's probably a very important approach I see for now.
And John, let me kind of ask you the same question, but maybe frame it differently. We're just talking about the pandemic. We had a position open at our place, a really talented producer that we wanted to recruit. She was working up in New York. CNN Plus had gone away. She's looking for work and was offered the job, but she's like, no, I can just work from home here in New York. I don't need to move there. Younger employee, talented. There's a lot of younger employees now. It used to be back in the day when I'm an old guy, but it'd be like, I'd do anything to make the boss happy. Now it's kind of like the boss has to do anything to make the employee happy. Things have changed so dramatically, not just the pandemic, not just inflation, not just the credit crunch. Now you've got a workforce that's just kind of, they're really focused on work-life balance and I want things my way. So what would your advice be to Chinese companies about how to navigate this and still think long-term, is which you were talking about, like even if it's a downturn, we're looking ahead, we're in manufacturing, we're going to get to our goals eventually. Talk about that.
Oh, wow, that's a $1 million question. It's difficult. It doesn't matter if you are Boeing or BMW or a mom and pop shop and everybody is having the same issue. It's not immune to the Chinese project or companies. I mean, I don't know. I guess if a boss or owner asked me, my advice would be that one, you try in gradual phases, you provide some incentives. And also, frankly speaking, that's a time you know who is up to his or her job. And that's your screening process, because again, we know the market shifts and there are good times and bad times. There are times I remember, just like Ben mentioned, many of the projects I landed here, some of them are in rural counties. They were having unemployment rate at 18, 20%. I remember vividly when that happened. I saw how desperate people were at that time. So again, I think it's a question many employers are asking these days and trying to find the.
I wasn't trying to stump you. Just a thought that came to mind, and primarily because I talked to Ben. And you're kind of in that situation where your wife's going off to Boston. You need to go to Boston. It would be very easy for you to go somewhere else, take your talents to another company, but BYD is holding on to you and actually advancing their marketplace. So I think that kind of holistic strategy of businesses, you really kind of have to be kind of a visionary in that sense. Well, can we afford to lose a Ben? Well, we can't. Maybe we can utilize this as a strength rather than a weakness. Can you talk about some takeaways for businesses as they look at this kind of ever-changing dynamic out there?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite sayings almost is the world that we knew before the pandemic doesn't really exist anymore to a certain extent, especially in the business world with all kinds of different supply chain constraints, customer requirements, and employee needs. I guess I'm probably one of the better examples of that. BYD's always been a company that tried to elevate people at a young age. They hold you accountable early, but it's always been a young, energetic company that's very dynamic, not a lot of bureaucracy within the organization. We just try to make decisions and move fast. And so, to the extent that companies have that opportunity within their own organizations, I would encourage you to do so. It's worked well for BYD and myself so far.
All right. Well, Abby just gave me the wrap sign. I talk for a living, so it's easy for me to sit up here and gab and gab and gab. I want to thank all four of you. Please give them a huge round of applause. Fantastic. Thank you so much.